Hi, Donald. Welcome to Earhacks FM.
Great to be here.
What was your first computer?
My first computer was a Epson HX20, which I believe was the world's first laptop, if I'm not mistaken. And I taught myself how to program in BASIC in it.
Wow. I think you're the first guest with an Epson computer. Never heard about that. There's Epson printers, but computers?
I had Epson printers for many years. I think it was an Epson MX80.
Mm-hmm.
That matrix printer was quite popular for many years. I had that with an old Apple compatible computer I had. But yeah, Epson, I guess, they weren't well known for computers, but they had an laptop that came out. I think it was in like 1981 or 82. That puts a age on myself. So, but that was literally my first computer.
And it was a laptop?
It was a laptop. So it had a tiny LCD screen. It was probably like, it could fit 4 or 5 lines of text on it max. But it was kind of neat that you could program in BASIC on it. It also had, some, assembly language, which I never taught myself that back when I was, very young. But you could actually draw pixels on the screen as well. So you could do some amount of graphics. I think it it was funny, if you've ever seen the movie War Games.
Yeah.
I had an acoustic coupler modem for it that you'd actually plug
with the rubber. Exactly.
With the rubber, you'd actually put the handset into the thing, which was kind of neat.
What was the name of the laptop? I have to look it up because
it's Epson HX-20. So if you Google that, you'll find links, but you'll see images of it. It's a cute little laptop.
Wow, it is. You can still buy it on eBay.
Honestly, that was something. I wish I had kept that laptop. I sold it to a friend when I went to university. And he
how much can you buy it? Say it.
I don't know how much it's going for now.
219.
I don't know. I would buy that. Worth the money if it worked.
But it looks really good. I would say the keyboard looks like mechanical keyboard right now, and HX20 or HC20. I never saw, and this is actually a small one. This is great. I thought it is huge.
No, it is. Once again, literally the world's first laptop, and you could actually fit it on your lap. Now it's interesting because the one I had an expansion port for memory, which went off on the side, and also had actually had a built-in printer. Looks like something you'd get at like a retail store or something, that prints out the receipts and stuff, or like an old calculator that had printers. But so it was a great piece of equipment and a great thing to learn on. So
interesting. It says the later most popular TRS-80 from Radio Shack, designed by Kyocera, was a similar design to the HX20. So. But to the listeners, you really have to look it up because it looks almost like a modern mechanical keyboard. It looks like a Keychron or something like this keyboard. So it looks perfect. And if you search for it, there's even an ad, handheld computer HX, but this is 20. And this is in German. I saw it. This is by maybe Lufthansa, looks like. Lufthansa did... This was a German. It says it is like paper sheet. So in Germany we have A4 format. It says this is actually the most amazing machine. If you think about this, it is smaller than MacBook Air.
It is, because the screen itself is right above the keyboard, right? So it is tiny. It's very portable.
I see a picture. It is like. In German, interestingly, and looks like a Lufthansa ad. Never saw this. The home computer guy, and this is a woman, Lufthansa woman. It held should be light in one hand the computer, and it had battery, accu, and after 5 minutes, I completely, was amazed by this.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there's a Wikipedia entry for it. So if you look at that, and actually has the picture too with the printer that I talked about with the rolls of paper. I mean, once again, kicking myself for selling this thing to my friend because, and you can see it actually had that micro cassette tape as well. You could actually store on it. It was an amazing piece of equipment.
And it looks good.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part.
Yeah, you'd look at it today and say like, hey, this doesn't look so.
Yeah, I would say today, if we would replace the screen or just chop off the screen and provide an external monitor, I would say it would be absolutely up to date. So nothing, right? I mean, it looks like mechanical keyboard. This is what it is.
So, but yeah,
and it's the first portable computer. You're absolutely right.
There you have it.
Yeah, but I had similar experience. I had I don't know how I got it, but it was later. An Olivetti computer, a laptop. It was also tiny. It was it had black-white LCD monitor screen, and there was nothing on it because I think I had to run DOS. It had already a diskette, but there's also a tiniest. It was smaller than the netbooks later. It was also amazing. I don't know how I got it. It was used, but it was amazing. So usually I ask the question what you did with the computer, but I think there were no games on it, so maybe chess or something. But
no, it was it's funny because there were no games. It's kind of had the basic built in to the computer, and I remember trying to actually build games on my own back in the day.
What did you try to achieve? Because the LCD screen is just like a calculator screen, more or less.
Yeah, it's funny because like the first thing I remember building on it in BASIC was, go figure, I'm like 11 years old. Wrote a program to calculate overtime pay. Right? It's like
wow, okay.
You work a certain number of hours over 40, you get time and a half. Just something simple to do that. Right? So that was the idea I got in my head to do. I don't know why. I can't recall. It's quite a while ago now, but but I do remember also trying to draw things on the screen to kind of do some game development, but I think it was too early in my days to really understand how to do that efficiently. It would have taken me a lot of time. So I spent a lot more time, thankfully, going out and riding bikes. I lived in Vermont at the time, so riding bikes, skiing, hiking, swimming. Did a lot of probably too much playing of Atari 2600 games as well. So I was inspired.
2600. I only know Atari 800. Is this 2600 a larger one or?
No, it's smaller. So it was really like a targeted, I guess, gaming console. I think Atari 800, you could actually program on that one. That one was some of the keyboard, right?
Yeah, the 800 XL, what I remember.
Yeah,
it was like C64, similar, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the 800, if I'm not mistaken as well, might have been able to play the 2600 games, but the games were somewhat better. I definitely had a friend who had an 800. I remember playing on it. But the 2600 was like your typical, like, before we had, Nintendo or, Sega or, Sony. It was like your cartridge-based system. All you could do is plug in a cartridge and you have the controllers, right? And I would say one of the most famous games on it was Pitfall. So that
I remember the name. What was the Pitfall about? What was it?
It was basically it was a 2D scrolling game where you had this guy who had to jump over, like, swing on vines over alligators or lakes and try and pick up like gold or silver or diamonds, right? And
Aztecs, so the
what?
It was like I remember that you have to swing, and there were crocodiles.
Yeah, and they
actually,
it's funny because like years later, they did a reboot, and I remember having it on. It's funny because I had like a history of like gaming consoles, and I still have a bunch of them, like, in storage around my house. I still have my wife's actual old 2600, and we actually they rebooted the 2600. You can actually buy it today. And the key thing about it was back in the day when you buy a 2600, your options to hook it up to a TV were somewhat limited, and you would be hard pressed to find that kind of connectivity today. But the reboot, the key thing about it plays the old games, but what it does is actually allows you to plug into HDMI, right, as your output. But yeah, so I think it was in Sega Genesis, or maybe, so one of my favorite gaming systems, which was the first 64-bit gaming platform, was Atari Jaguar. There was a reboot of Pitfall called Pitfall Mayan Adventure. And it was more modern graphics. The original Pitfall was like goofy when you looked at it, and had some great, sound to the game and whatnot. And this really, I don't know, earworm like song that played through the thing. So, but the reboot was kind of neat. It was a more modern game. I believe it was still a 2D scroller, but just much better graphics. But there was an Easter egg in the game where if you found this one place in the game, it would actually jump you into the original Pitfall. Mm-hmm. So you could actually play the original Atari 2600 Pitfall inside of the Pitfall Mayan Adventure, which was great, right? I loved that homage to the original. Was good fun. So
for unknown reasons, what I remember right now is Montezuma's Revenge game.
Yes, I remember that. It's funny because I want to say I played that on the old Apple II, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, what I see is also Wikipedia entry. I remember the title. I don't know whether I played it, but as you mentioned, Pitfall with the crocodiles. For unknown reasons, I just remember and it was Apple II, Atari 2600, and now I see how it looked like. Okay, I saw this already. Atari 5200, yep. And Commodore, IBM PC, Master System, and ZX Spectrum. It was called Panama Joe. Wow. Okay, so you started with the Epson, and
after the Epson, I for many years I had people may not remember this, but there was an Apple clone. So it was an Apple II clone. It was actually this company called Franklin. They made the Franklin Ace. I think it was 1000, and they got sued out of existence by Apple, if I'm not mistaken. But created an Apple clone. I had one of these, right? And I had Apple hard drives, but I used Apple for many years, all through high school. It was like another, place where I learned how to program, and I had all manner of, different, things on. I actually ran a bulletin board system back in the 80s with it.
But you learned on the Epson Basic, and then
that's where I learned Basic. Yeah, so I did with the Apple though, because Apples were quite popular.
What you did on the Epson? So what was the biggest achievement of the Epson, and how you got the Apple? So what was the transition?
So on the Epson, I would say it was probably that the overtime pay calculator that I wrote was probably my biggest achievement that I can remember. With the the Apple, what was nice was Apples became quite popular in the United States in schools. So we had access to Apple II computers. Apple IIe, I think, was the most common variety. Occasionally you'd see Apple IIc. And I got to learn things like, if I recall correctly, there was a logo we had on Apple, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely Basic was something I did a lot more basic programming on the Apple, right? Because you'd boot up the Apple, you'd get the command prompt, and away you go, with programming. I can't recall much of what I programmed on Apple though. I would say I got more into playing games and everything on the Apple. And it's funny because I was recalling as we were talking about Pitfall and whatnot. One of my favorite games was the Ultima series. If you've ever heard of it. No. So it was Ultima 1 through, I'm not sure how far it went. I definitely played up through Ultima 4, but it was a scrolling adventure game. It was just, I would say it was kind of like a prequel maybe to something like Diablo, which I, later in my, when I had PCs and, would do games on there. Diablo is probably the game I spent the most time playing. Thankfully, I played Warcraft, the original ones, but I never got into World of Warcraft, but I played Diablo up through, Diablo 2. I played Diablo 3, but I never finished that one. Diablo 1 and 2, though, I finished. And I think, I want to say, was from 2 to 3? I had to wait 10 years for Diablo 3 to come out.
Wow.
There was a 10, which is crazy when you think in time frames, right, of things. 10 years to wait for a new game to come out. And when it came out, unfortunately I was had a Sony Vaio laptop that I bought expecting that Diablo 3 was going to come out, and it was delayed by 2 or 3 years when I bought the laptop. And by the time the game came out, the game required better hardware than I had. I had to basically play Diablo 3 with all the lowest settings on graphics and whatnot for it to even be playable.
So you're a hardcore gamer?
I at one point in my life, maybe. No, not anymore.
No. Okay.
Usually now it's something goofy on a phone. I like Clash Royale on my phone, which is a tower defense game. right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because my son has gotten a lot more into more modern gaming, so he'll play things like Fortnite and
Mm-hmm.
played Destiny for many years. But I think he just
So
upgraded to Grand Theft Auto.
back then you played more or you programmed? Where you spend more time?
Well, it depends on when back then. Obviously, like I would say really hardcore into programming through high school and then through university, and obviously then started my career. I had learned a bunch of programming languages when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Everything including
So what came after BASIC?
Pascal,
Mm-hmm.
also Fortran and COBOL.
At high
Um,
school?
yeah, in high school. So
Whoa, it's a crazy high school. You.
well, it wasn't high school. I was actually taking some classes and some programming classes in college at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So it was like there I was able to take Fortran and COBOL.
So you were at high school and you were in parallel. You also went to college.
I took some college classes, yeah. So, and
Super cool.
it was really, if you wanted to learn programming, it was the place you would have to go. We didn't have the internet back then. I couldn't just Google programming. It's like getting access to programming languages. It's like, yeah, high school I had Pascal, I could do BASIC. We had Logo, but that was pretty much the extent of it, right? So.
But why you wanted to do that? Because as I understand, you were in Vermont and you could go outside.
Well, I moved to New Jersey.
Oh, this was the reason. Okay.
Yeah. So, but when yeah, it's interesting because I really got interested in programming, and I started as well. Like once I got a PC, which was in the late 80s, I got access to some additional programs. So there was like Turbo, Prolog, which I guess was like originally from Borland, if anybody remembers that company.
Yeah, but I didn't add a JBuilder a lot of time. But Turbo Prolog, I never heard about it. Turbo Pascal, of course. But
I'm sorry.
Turbo
Actually, it's funny because I said Turbo Prolog. I meant Turbo Pascal. The reason I said Turbo Prolog, sorry, I got ahead of myself. I picked up Turbo Prolog as well in the 80s. So that came out in like 1986, and I got access to Turbo Prolog, which was like at the time, this was before I had graduated high school and whatnot. So teaching myself Turbo Prolog, that was like a little bit outlandish, right? It's like Pascal and Fortran and COBOL were like one thing, right? And BASIC as well. Prolog was like a completely different animal to be learning, right? So
beginnings of AI a little bit, right? In Prolog, wasn't it like?
Yes. So it was the beginnings in some ways of AI. I would say like AI owes its probably heritage, combination of languages like Lisp and Prolog. I didn't get to do any Lisp though until university.
And why you did it? Why are you so interested? What was your goal? To you want to program something, achieve something? Or are you fascinated with whatever science fiction, or what was actually the idea? So why was it motivated?
I like just being able to like create and solve problems.
But why in 5 languages?
I don't know. I found something just intriguing and interesting about the ability to like control a computer with like different languages, right? And what the different approaches and problems you could solve with it were, right? So it was interesting because another language that I taught myself while I was in high school was actually DBase 3+. And I would say that was the most practical thing I learned because I could actually build actual programs and I used to build different database applications. Because with DBase, you for folks that aren't familiar with it, DBase was both a programming language but also had a local database. It was a database management system, right? So you created these things called DBF files, and you had like it had a data manipulation language, a data definition language. You can create tables in DBF file, have indexes and different things, right? And it was like, I would say, like, if I'm recalling correctly, like it was like a row based language. Like you could keep like a cursor in a table, and it was like it was really good because back then, when you were doing things as well, like you had very limited memory, right? It's not like you could load a lot of stuff in memory. So like you had to have kind of like this, the row-based, cursor-based approach to doing things, right? It's like moving positions through, a table and whatnot, right?
Mhm.
And like there was, simple things like you could do like summarizing,
Mhm.
data and whatnot. But in some ways similar, but probably a lot different than what most modern programmers would know about, like using something like SQL, right? Completely different data manipulation language. So
How different? So what we will do in DBase to select all rows or one row? What
I'm going to
roughly?
be hard pressed.
Just roughly, just to get an idea, know how it can be different. It's more like you had to like working with JDBC directly without a query, or you know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting because like I can't remember as much about DBase 3 Plus. I did many years. I programmed in another language that was actually called the DBase compiler. It was called Clipper. And with Clipper, there were things that you would use. And I'm trying to remember the actual objects. This is going back to the early 90s. Clipper had a built-in object called, I think it's called tbrowse, if I recall correctly. It's funny, I don't actually. Okay,
I found DBase Plus.
Yeah, there's DBase 3 Plus. I did DBase 4 in university. But you would typically like, with at least in Clipper with tbrowse, what you could do is use tbrowse to basically display the windowed contents of a table. All right, or the equivalent of a table in Clipper. And it was interesting because like you didn't do things like selecting and filtering down, let's say, the columns and rows. You could display you choose what columns, let's say, you wanted to display in a table on the screen. And then once again, you would set a specific position in effectively like a cursor in SQL to figure out what row you wanted to look at, and then you would actually, either query or update, things.
Almost like JDBC, right? Result set.
A little bit, yeah. So it was, once again, you get this very programmatic. You had basically, where SQL is like kind of like its own standalone thing. The nice thing with both DBase and Clipper is like you had the data manipulation language built into the programming language itself. So you could do programming type stuff like managing, let's say, arrays or sorting stuff. But then,
do you remember SQLJ?
SQLJ.
It was Java project. It looked like JSPs for SQL, and it was, I think, from Sun Microsystems, because it sounds almost like SQLJ was the name.
I'm just Googling it. It's an ISO standard for embedded static SQL statements. I remember the name, but I never used it. It
was Java and SQL, Oracle, Compaq, Informix, Sybase, and Cloudscape, and Sun Microsystems. And it was like Pro C in Oracle back then. And it looks like JSP, so you could embed SQL into your text. And it's also a Wikipedia entry, so we'll put it to the show notes. And I remember I did some for clients, some proof of concepts. But
Well, it's interesting. I just Googled as well, like looking and see if I recall someone doing this, and it looks like there's still a project out on GitHub for it called JDBF, which would allow you to access DBF files from Java. So it's a library for that. It hasn't been updated in 8 years, so I can't testify to the how good it is or not, but like you might be able to see how things.
After publishing the episode, the listeners will port, the JDBF to Epson.
Okay, I'll buy that. $10. That's what I'm going to willing to spend.
But SQLJ, I have to. This was actually interesting idea back then. I forgot where I wanted to do this, but or had to do this. But I remember what I did prior to this. There was similar standard for Oracle database, so you could embed SQL to C, and there was a pre-processor or post-processor, and it created like JSPs, the C or C++ code, and SQLJ was similar back then, and it's interesting piece. It's also old one, and was Clipper related to DBase?
Yeah, so Clipper was a compiler So DBase was interpreted, right? So you'd start up the DBase interpreter and would basically then run. You could store programs in, I think they were called PRG files, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, like you could run those within the DBase interpreter. With Clipper, what you had is it was more like C in some ways, where effectively like you have a compiler and a linker. And it was, if I recall correctly, it was a P code compiler, but you could then actually link and create executables, right? They ran on DOS. So it was a DOS-based programming language. And it was funny. I remember fondly the linker that I used. I can still remember the name of it. It was called Blinker. And it was a commercial product that came out for Clipper. And there was actually a great third-party, tooling and library space for Clipper. But Blinker was cute because like when you started up, it basically had ASCII art that basically the art was animated. It would actually blink at you as it was linking. Thus the name Blinker, right? So, but you'd basically like do make files, for all your PRG files to compile them, right? And then you'd use Blinker to link them up.
I wanted actually to ask about Clipper and DBase relation earlier because a few years before pandemic, I had an interesting project, and a developer from back then became a CTO of a company, and they created mission critical software on Clipper. And then they got new Windows version, and the Clipper was no more supported, so it couldn't run because
the Windows version was Visual Objects, because I have books on that behind me. Sorry.
So the company, there was a bigger company, was forced to update the Windows operating system, and this Windows didn't support the Clipper anymore. And for unknown reasons, there were PL1 developers right now and AS400, and they asked me to help them to port this to Java.
Okay.
And this was like almost mission impossible because I had no idea what Clipper is doing, and they had no idea about Java. And I wanted to write Java in this way that they will understand what I did. So it means there were basically, I couldn't use, not sophisticated, just objects. I just basically implemented everything with interfaces and static methods. So like a procedural style, which worked. And we also used Excel for testing. So they had, the calculations in Excel, and we read Excel. And but the interesting part is it worked extremely well because the guy back then still remembered what he did, years ago, exactly knew what's going on. And he basically dictated, and I wrote the Java code, and we got the test data in Excel, and we were done in 2 weeks. The interesting part is they said, okay, this project is not that nice because it's not nicely documented with diagrams and there's no UML and stuff like that. And a consulting company tried to implement this from scratch. And they stopped after a few years, and they couldn't because the guy was missing. The business logic was not there. So they try, to investigate and to gather requirements. But it was really hard because there was no one who knew the logic. This is why the project failed.
That's
and
funny.
This is why I heard Clipper. I remember that. So it was a really interesting project because in 2 weeks we were done and lots of fun. Yeah.
I was going to say, and you're making me recall all of this interesting stuff in the attics of my memory. So DBase was built by a company called Ashton Tate, if I recall correctly. Clipper was implemented by a company called Nantucket. Nantucket was later purchased by Computer Associates.
Oh.
So Clipper became CA Clipper. They came out with a Windows version, which was called CA Visual Objects. I actually have some old books behind me because I actually did some CA Visual Objects programming for a few years. That was Windows. It was kind of neat.
Was it different to Clipper? Vastly different, or was it still the same?
It had similarities, but vastly different. It was like a full, Windows-based kind of programming language, and you could build native Windows executables. It was occasionally highly unstable. Visual Objects had this approach that I later learned and appreciated better because it was a bit more stable. Visual Objects had this repository-based development approach that I later learned, and used in Smalltalk.
Mhm.
So Smalltalk, when you program in Smalltalk, and actually I learned Smalltalk in the mid 90s, like 1994. And I would say
Mhm.
like that was after Clipper, like Smalltalk was like the probably biggest, impact in terms of my learning and
Mhm.
understanding and appreciation of programming. Well, I learned a lot of stuff before then. I didn't really appreciate the history of programming until I learned Smalltalk. And I spent a lot of time studying the origins of languages, where they came from and whatnot. But what's interesting is that going back to Clipper and DBase, there was another language that might be more well known. You may recognize the name, is actually FoxPro.
Yeah.
So FoxPro, there was a whole series of what they call them X-based languages, which started with DBase, but FoxPro used the same storage technology, the DBF files, right? They had a separate indexing.
How is possible? Who invented the DBF files? I mean, there should be one company.
So it was Ashton Tate, I think. Which
Okay.
let me Google that to make sure I'm not setting
No.
listeners
I mean,
up.
just as the one company did the format, and all others used that, right?
Well, and it's funny because they came up with the DBF file format, so the actual data storage, but the indexing format was different. So if I recall correctly, DBase had a extension called NDX. Clipper added their own indexing approach, and their file extension was NTX. And I think FoxPro, I might be wrong on this because I didn't do really much FoxPro. I think I don't know if it was like CDX or something. FoxPro.
So in theory, you can have one data file and FoxPro and all the others accessing the same data file, just reading, right?
Yes. So they could all read DBF files, right? It's really whether you use the indexing. And the indexing, I think, it was more efficiency that you gained, using the different indexing approaches. And what you could actually do with
So you CQRS, you had command query segregation back then, right? So you could have...
Sure. I'm going to Google just to make sure I get this correct because I haven't...
So you spend lots of time with FoxPro and DBase and stuff like that?
Yeah, so FoxPro, the extension was CDX. So
CDX,
DBase,
okay.
NDX, Clipper, NTX, FoxPro, CDX. Now your listeners have very useless trivia.
We already covered punch cards and patch tapes.
Okay, good.
I mean, this is now advanced technology we're talking about, right?
Yes. Okay. All right, I'll stop that in terms of DBase and Clipper and FoxPro. But yeah, FoxPro went on with Microsoft, right? There's Microsoft Visual FoxPro. I don't know if it's still maintained or not, but it was available for many years, right? It was popular.
This is what I wanted to tell to say that Visual FoxPro and I never used FoxPro. I only heard about DBase and stuff like that because if someone used DBase or FoxPro back then, they really liked that. And this is why I know it and I still remember because you were in the early Java projects and we started and they just said, okay, why it doesn't work so well as a DBase? I have no idea what DBase is. and then I understood that it works so well because DBase is the database and the program on one machine. And we were forced to distribute everything. So we had no chance to compete, back then with DBase because the user experience, you couldn't achieve that in a distributed environment. So it is before image, after image, all the thing you have to deal with it when not necessary in FoxPro was single user system, right?
Yep.
The same was true for Microsoft Access later.
Yeah,
the same story. People were really happy, and there were architect or management decisions. We have to migrate away from Access. It was the same story. People were disappointed because,
Well, and I think that was the great story about that category of programming languages that basically had local database access. Right? It was so quick and easy to get up and productive because you didn't need to do a relational database install and then use JDBC drivers or whatever you use to access the database, right? And then so it's like you had literally just the programming language and data access built into the language.
FileMaker is
right?
also similar, I think, right? So it's still around. FileMaker.
Yeah, it's funny because there were other languages people may not recognize. Like there was Paradox from Borland.
Also heard about that
one.
Was it also DBF compatible, Paradox?
No. Paradox had its own storage, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But
the name sounds great. This is what I remember. This Paradox is a professional name. FoxPro, we can argue, but Paradox sounds great. Yeah. For me, at least.
Well, it's interesting. One thing, and I did so many years of Pascal programming, in between high school and college, and I never got to use it professionally. every once in a while, I think I probably had a book on it at some stage, like looked at possibly learning Pascal grew into Delphi, which I think is still around in some places.
This I wanted to ask you. Delphi was actually huge, and I wanted to learn Delphi because I also spent some time with Turbo Pascal. I started with BASIC, but what I wanted to have as an executable application, which was not available on BASIC, or at least not on my machine. And then I asked someone, I say, with Turbo Pascal, you can do it. So I just learned Turbo Pascal in order to have executable proper applications. And this is how I learned Turbo Pascal. And then someone told me, hey, the real thing is Delphi. Is Turbo Pascal, but object-oriented.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is object-oriented? Because this object orientation I had no idea what it is, but it sounds great. So object orientation, what does mean objects, right? And and then Java happened, so I never had the chance. But I think if Java happened 1 year later, I would be a Delphi, fanboy.
Yeah, it's funny because if I hadn't gone, so I got into Smalltalk programming because I worked in IBM back in the 90s, and IBM had a program called Object Technology University. And I believe I got in, like it was at the, kind of like the prototype class for object technology.
But what interesting, because we have to stop for a second, because you are interesting. So earlier in high school, you learned almost all languages. Now I'm curious what you did at the university. I mean, what happened then? So what was the trajectory? What you studied? And
university was mostly Pascal, and I did have Lisp. So it was Pascal, I think, assembly. And Lisp were the three languages.
And you did something aside, or just enjoyed, New Jersey?
Well, it's funny because while I was going to college, I was actually consulting as well, doing Clipper programming. So I was actually that was the way I funded my college, was through consulting. So, that was kind of it. I obviously kept gaming as well. I think I played way too many hours of SimCity. And other, PC gaming became a thing for me at that point. So, but then, I was in college, so studying and socializing as well.
Okay. And after college?
After college. So it's interesting. All of this stuff, which I'm telling you as well, you can actually, there's a blog where I tell 40 years of my career.
But talking with you is better than reading about, So
I know. So we'll talk about it. But if people,
what's the name of the blog?
So it's Joy of Programming. So if you do Joy of Programming and Donald Robb, you will find, my 40 years of story, and you'll hear everything all the way back to the Epson HX20 story that we told. But I tell the story of where I started. So when I started off my professional career, I started off in healthcare, and I was doing Clipper programming at Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey.
But maybe as motivation to the listeners, it is worth reading because you had something to do with collections and Java lambdas and Eclipse collections. So,
yes.
So in a few hours, maybe we will reach the point of Java collections. But this was in one point we'll talk about that, right? So,
I would say like in the blog I cover like 40 years of history and probably a 10 to 15 minute read. But we'll get there in a few hours.
Is it a blog or a book?
It's a blog. Let me just look. Actually, Medium tells you let's see what it's reports.
It's an old scroll, This is like.
So if you go to donrob.medium.com, I blog prolifically. So I think I got like 270 blogs out there. But let's see, Joy of Programming. Donald Robb, and it is. It says it is a 10-minute read. So in 10 minutes, you can learn 40 years of history. You'll also see a neat picture. So remember I was telling you about Smalltalk is where I started learning about programming history and the origins of things. So when I started programming professionally in Smalltalk and I got into Smalltalk, so I started off at Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey. Blue Cross outsourced their IT department to IBM. I became an IBM employee. And at the time it was called...
From the healthcare, right? From
healthcare. So I was still on an outsourced account. So I was still working in healthcare. It's just I was an IBM employee.
Okay.
And I got into the object...
And you learned Smalltalk because you had to, because of the job, right?
No, I learned Smalltalk because I had the opportunity to go learn Smalltalk. What I later did was I helped turn Smalltalk into a solution we used at work.
Well, don't tell me you learned it at the high school because you were already in university.
No, this was I was in IBM. I was in a place. So IBM had this once again program called Object Technology University. They had two tracks. One was Smalltalk, one was C++, and I had a choice. Okay. Either I could do Smalltalk or C++. I had already started to teach myself some C++. And I said, okay, let me go to the Smalltalk track because that's not something I felt like I could easily pick up. And it was I started out with a 5-week immersion program. And basically in 5 weeks in Atlanta at IBM's one of their training centers, got to learn Smalltalk, learn object-oriented analysis and design. And that completely just changed my view.
And was it good? Was it worth?
It was amazing. It's 8 hours in the classroom a day and like during the day. And I would spend, as many hours as they kept open the lab to actually do programming on my own. So I was
then you learn the most. So if you have
exactly. It was the hands-on after the classes. Like I was learning concepts, but I was just putting them in practice, and I was like, this is incredible. So that was how I learned object-oriented programming. Later then, when I went back to work after the 5 weeks, actually Clipper had, because I was still maintaining some Clipper systems, I had visual object systems. Visual objects was fully object-oriented. I now appreciated that better, what that meant. Clipper had an add-on which we actually used. It was a library called Classy. It was actually class parentheses with Y, Classy. And Classy actually gave you full object orientation in Clipper, so you could actually define your own classes. They had 4
also
built-in
polymorphism. Ones. Could you have kind of an abstract class and subclasses in the database? Because this would be really interesting.
In Clipper, that I'd have to Google whether or not Classy supported
because then magic happens, right? Because then the subclasses can have different behavior, and you read the superclass, and you can override, the methods in the subclasses, and then you have how we called it back then, transparent persistence. So this would be it wouldn't be transparent because the object would The interesting part is, do you remember whether the objects were attached to the storage or detached?
Yeah. So according to AI, the Classy library for CA Clipper did not natively support abstract classes or pure virtual methods in the way modern object-oriented languages. So if we believe AI, I'll say it's probably not wrong. But it meant you could develop I would say it was somewhat akin then in some ways to Visual Basic, right? Visual Basic didn't really have abstraction. You could define concrete classes, right?
Was Visual Basic object-oriented? No.
At some point it was. I had a period of my life.
.NET, everything was the same. So I remember as .NET came out, so C# Visual Basic and all .NET language are almost the same. So this was crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think Visual Basic, if I'm not mistaken, I did 6 months of Visual Basic 6 programming at some point in my career. This was after the Smalltalk. So, by the way, you take a Smalltalk developer and forget throwing them into Java, throw them into Visual Basic, and, they'll be miserable. Visual Basic 6. So, because Smalltalk, for those that don't know, is like, it was like really the language. The creator of Smalltalk, his name was Alan Kay. He coined the term object-oriented. So, Smalltalk was like a pure object-oriented language. It's like object-oriented the way, developers could only dream to have object-oriented supported. It was amazing.
So I remember a team of Smalltalk programmers develop application, and everyone was happy with the application, but the company policy was Java. So, and they were forced to migrate from Smalltalk to Java. They had no idea about Java, and I was supposed to help them. And they cursed Java because what they were always missing were blocks. And they said, okay, what is a block? And they say, this is just a block. Why you don't have it in Java? I was like, we can have a inner class or a block.
You know what a block is?
Yeah. And
it's a lambda.
Yeah. But they couldn't explain what a block is. And I showed them our block, and they were not satisfied. It's like, I don't know what do you mean? But then we, together, after a while, we built actually an interesting system. And what they did was crazy. They had, they built in their classes, inner classes like meta, and the class, there was meta class inheritance and class inheritance in Java. And for them, it was absolutely natural. And I say, now Java is great, and they were happy. And I look at this, it's like, this was alien technology, what you're building with Java. But everyone was happy. So, okay, let's go with it. And we used Toppling back then. So Toplink was Smalltalk, and Eclipse Link was so we used Toplink, Eclipse Link back then.
Yep.
With polymorphism, and the object were attached to the storage. So it was a very thin application. In fact, we implemented the entire thing with budget was only dedicated for the documentation. So it was like remaining budget, and it still worked, and we had lots of fun still. So therefore, I never did anything with Smalltalk, but I'm really interested in it. I was a little bit disappointed how the IDE looked like, because they said this is the best thing ever, and they showed me the workbench, and I was like, okay, the Visual H for Java looks better. It was Smalltalk based,
I was going to say Visual H for Java was actually implemented in Smalltalk, and it did look nicer, right?
It looked nicer, right? For them, it looked really like ASCII text, I would say, right? Like beginnings of Swing, maybe. But what I understood is there is the IDE is the runtime, so you can just run it and see what happens. So this is why they were so productive, and they missed that in Java. So we used Eclipse back then, not Visual H for Java rather than Eclipse already. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because I may have mentioned in the Joy programming blog, I had actually gone from Smalltalk. I had done Visual H for Java. Visual H for Java was the very first Java IDE that I used, and it was familiar to me, coming because I had done Visual H for Smalltalk. And later, when Visual H for Java stopped supporting newer versions of Java, and I think it made it as far as JDK 1.3, for anybody who remembers that far back. It didn't support 1.4. But that was when Eclipse came out, and I had to make a choice. At this point in my career, I was working at Goldman Sachs, so I'd moved from healthcare to finance. And
why you moved? Just because you wanted, or?
Interesting story. So I spent about 7 years in healthcare from like 1994 to 2000. I spent a year doing. I guess e-business consulting would be the category of work, but basically that was during the .com boom, which went boom. Then I had joined Goldman Sachs as an application architect, and was basically at this point doing Java full time. So I'd done a full transition. I went Smalltalk to Visual Basic to Java, and then to Java full time.
And how you like Java? So you learned Java at Goldman Sachs or earlier?
I hated Java. It was horrible. Experience using this language. And
I learned Java after C++ and also hated Java at the beginning, because in C++ you had headers, and in Java you had interfaces, and for me it was like it's a bit different. So it was not as clean. And what I really hated were the applets, because I couldn't understand the point of animated Duke. So okay, nice, everyone is crazy about the Duke, but why we need this in browser? I couldn't get the point, because it loaded for 3 minutes, and at the end of the day, there was an animation with a mascot.
Yeah.
And then, thankfully, I got the first server-side project, and then it changed everything. But at the beginning, for me, was crazy times, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because the reason I say I hate Java is I was coming from a Smalltalk background. I was used to having, and this is actually the probably genesis story of Eclipse Collections in some ways. Like I had very rich collections, and we had blocks, aka lambdas, in Smalltalk, and this you might find this interesting. A little bit of history. The Clipper language had blocks. So I've used lambdas since 1990, and the block syntax in Clipper was inspired basically by Smalltalk. The developers who worked on Clipper were fans of Smalltalk, and I didn't know that at the time.
So is Smalltalk older than Clipper?
Yes. Clipper came out in the 80s. Smalltalk started development in the early 70s or maybe even late 60s, but I think the first version was...
okay, my impression was the Smalltalk was maybe a little bit older than Java. Is that old? I had no idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the first versions of Smalltalk were not publicly available. They were internal at Xerox PARC, but I think there was a Smalltalk 72 and 76. The first publicly available Smalltalk was Smalltalk 80, and that was the Smalltalk that a lot of developers got to learn. Then you had a bunch of vendors came up with different Smalltalk implementations. IBM had IBM Smalltalk with Visual H, which is what was then used for Visual H for Java. There was a company that IBM, I think, was a subsidiary, I don't know if it still is, called OTI, which built they built this version control system, which was amazing for Smalltalk, called Envy. And it was actually what was used in Visual H for Java as well.
Yeah, and I had to use it with Java in Envy.
Yeah. So, yeah, so once again, interesting stuff, and this is why I was mentioning too. Like, I've learned so much now about this like history, and there's so much history in computing. There's so many just different things people have done, right? It's like we see this very limited view of like there's Java and Spring. Mm-hmm. No, there's a lot more in the universe has happened, and you do encounter stuff out there in the wild, right? But
so I saw a lot, and the reason being is because I was always often involved as a consultant in migration projects, or I had to work, for all the enterprises. So you see just the stuff, right? So I saw the Envy, I see the green screens, I ask question, what is it? So I remember the name. I have no experience what it actually did, but it always had interesting conversations with the developers. I learned a lot. So what I try, to learn is the concepts. What didn't work back then? Yep. What were the solutions? I remember recently, actually, they had a pattern in the DB2, in old DB2, and they called it, I think, group sorting. It's like what they did, they sorted by the second row, like AAA, BBB, CCC, and I found the same principle in NoSQL databases to store Java object hierarchies in DynamoDB, for instance. Exactly the same principle with different names. Like, this is crazy. Or before image and after image. If you had a JPA with optimistic locks, this is exactly what happens. So I found I really like the enterprise stuff because I don't know, it was challenging but somehow easy. It was both at the same time. Like for instance, the common transaction gateway to the host. It was also interesting because it's two-phase commit and stuff. An interesting name, common transaction gateway, and there were lots of overlapping concepts. Maybe so if you learn one concept, you can easily learn the others. So yeah, interesting times.
It was.
Goldman Sachs with JDK. Which one you started?
What version? I had used JDK 1.3 at Goldman. We went to 1.4. So interesting, I guess, getting back to the genesis story of, why would a Goldman Sachs employee create a Java collections framework?
Yeah.
Which actually happened in 2004.
But we will discuss this next time because today it is mission impossible.
we have run out already.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is our podcast, but it's maybe too long. So, but I interrupted you too many times because I also got idea with the clipper and it was like overlapping, experiences. And
well, it's funny because I had a great time just talking about it. Like I haven't heard someone as interested as yourself, like in this history of interesting stuff. So it's good to recall some of it.
Because exactly. And if you know a little bit history, why we should repeat, the same problems on the same failures or errors from the past, and this is why if two-phase commit had problems, I'm pretty sure already someone would try with AI to wipe code and two-phase commit system because an agent will maybe say it is good to use two-phase commit, and if it is problematic or which limitations there are, so you can be faster, But I interrupted with something interesting with Envy, IntelliJ for Java, and Smalltalk.
Yep.
And then I interrupted you with whatever I said. So you wanted to tell me why you like the IntelliJ for Java and how Envy happened with the repository, and then I interrupted you, and then interrupted you again with Goldman Sachs.
So what was interesting, I guess, with Envy, that something it had that just modern, what we know now as Git version control doesn't happen. I would say like people can do it via practices more than Envy just did it naturally for you. Pretty much everything that you saved in Envy, we used to say Envy was like an elephant. It never forgot. So every time you save a method, it was immediately compiled in version. Well, not versioned. It was what's called an addition was created. So effectively a version in the repository was created for you. So you had unlimited history of everything that you did at the method level. You could look at all additions of a specific method. So imagine it was like local history that you have in IntelliJ now, right? Where effectively you can look at it at the method level in a class. So you weren't dealing with files, you were dealing with classes and methods, and like you had constructs available to you that really enabled for you, to look at things and in I'm going to use
sounds almost like Kafka.
Kafka. I have not used Kafka.
Kafka is it is sold as a messaging system, but actually it is a database. So how it works is
Kafka. Yes, sorry. I still haven't used it, but yes, I guess more familiar with it. So didn't click at first.
Basically, or Kafka is similar to Git.
Yeah.
It is like, you have messages and you append only messages and you never delete actually stuff. But we had problems with Envy. There was an insurance, a huge, the entire insurance was on Envy. And in the end, they had some performance problems because, it was too big.
Yeah, those wind up being the problems, right? Where, it's a scale.
I hated one thing in Visual Edge for Java. I couldn't see the entire class. So the problem was you click on a method and you only saw the method, and I cannot do this. So I would like to scroll and see everything. So I printed out the classes, I have to admit.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny. So it's interesting, and this, probably for another time we can talk about. There were things that I missed in Smalltalk, and that were I'm not sure if they were in Visual Edge for Java, to be honest. I can't recall. Smalltalk had this concept, which I forgot about for like 30 years, called method categories. Mm-hmm. And Java needs them, right? It's like, because what we do right now in Java is so imagine you could basically, for a method, tag that it belonged to a specific category, right? Mm-hmm. So, let's say you had methods that were like in a class that did filtering, or methods that did grouping. Oh. You could tag them and say, like, these methods belong to this category. And this was actually, the ultimately inspiration that I followed in terms of the book that I wound up writing called Eclipse Collections Categorically. And what I did was I found a way to actually implement method categories in Java, but I'm doing it through IntelliJ, right? Where you can use custom code folding regions to basically take a scope of code, right? Where, let's say you've got a bunch of methods in your class, so you can put a begin and end region, comment around it. And what IntelliJ will do automatically for you is actually put that into a tree view for you, right? So instead of, like, if you've got 150 methods in a class, instead of 150 things that you've got to scroll through, although if you like scrolling, then great. But you can then actually group them by the way you want to organize them in the class. So the idea with Smalltalk, and it wasn't, I would say, is really up to a developer to do this. Like, if you wanted things to be easier to find because you couldn't just scroll to look for it, the way to do it would be to actually use method categories to, like, group things. So it's like, look for the group of thing.
This was my experience, 25 years ago, I guess I did this. Now maybe we're completely different. Maybe I will appreciate, the reason that.
Well, I did not appreciate it 30 years ago when I first learned it, 25 years. So it's like, up until recently, like, oh my gosh, like, why have I been missing this? And I didn't realize this was so important, right? And it was really...
what they're doing with this method is just an overview for during development time. You needed to find, specific cohesive methods.
No, it really comes down to, it's like, it's about helping... developers not just find things, but to learn them, right? If you have, let's say, a collections framework that has a very rich API, or even streams, let's say streams has 44 methods on it, right? How do you learn 44 things, right? It would actually be, there's a natural thing called information chunking that humans benefit from, where we take things together and group them together, right? So method categories allow you to do that, where, like, you can take that 44 methods and maybe have filtering, grouping, testing methods, right? And then put things like any match, all match, none match into testing, or like things like contains. So it's like anything that returns Boolean maybe is a testing method,
right? Even a small use case for that, because what I do right now is I use Java records as entities basically, and sometimes I put JSON serialization code on the records. And what I could do is category serialization, for instance, and category, validation or business logic. So I can see just by selecting serialization, all serialization related logic.
You can do that. Yeah. If it's,
okay.
That's exactly the
valid use case for that?
Yeah, anything that, once again, you want to be able to either filter.
Tag, basically.
Pretty much. Okay. So, but since we don't have, and it's, if I was to implement it in Java, it would be via tag, and I would use that for
annotation.
Both.
There should be source annotation. Right?
Exactly. So I would use it for JavaDoc, and I would use it for the IDEs to recognize it. Today, I use, once again, custom code folding region and IntelliJ to simulate method categories. But
why
then
not
it means
annotations until IntelliJ go with annotations. Then it would be no.
Well, I have no way of changing the actual structure view in IntelliJ to recognize the annotation. Right? Yeah, I know. It would be nice if it was, once again, just built into the language, right? I feel like I shouldn't be defining my own, language constructs and building ID around it.
As a JEP.
It should be. So it's funny because I've shared this with folks who work on the core JDK team. So, and I think
what they said?
They actually think these are people I've talked to think it's a good idea. So I think Stuart Marks actually talked about it at DevOps Belgium in the Ask the Architect section.
And we covered the Stuart Marks, the punch tapes. How to? Yeah. So,
nice.
So we already see that we advance in our topics because there was no mentioning of punch tapes.
I did not do punch tapes, so
exactly.
Stuart's got me beat.
Modern times, modern Java already. This is the time after punch tapes. Because at the beginning we had a chat with punch cards, and Stuart apologized and said, "Okay, we actually have to cover the punch tapes because he was wrong with punch cards." So we spent a little bit time on the podcast to discuss the punch tapes and cards. And Goldman Sachs, what is your goal? Always collections, or what?
No, I worked in finance. I don't want to build a collections, library. Okay. In fact, I would say, because we're at time of, if we do another session, what I would leave your listeners with is there's a blog I wrote called.
Of course.
there's always a blog.
That's the next 40 years.
So I wrote this blog called My 10-Year Quest for Concise Lambda Expressions in Java. So I started building Eclipse Collections in 2004, and it was a library that was inspired by my experience using Smalltalk, which had a very rich collections framework. So I developed a framework that needed lambdas in 2004, and I had to wait 10 years for it, right? And this was how I actually got involved in the JSR 335 expert group with Brian Getz and company to actually get lambdas into Java 8. So I didn't want to build a collections framework. I just wanted the productivity benefits of having lambdas in Java with a collections framework. And it's no one else was building it. I wound up building it, right? And
the interesting part is, and I think it was the Java 1, the Java 1, the old ones.
2014?
Pardon?
2014, maybe?
Yeah. And someone said, would like, to meet Donald. And he, and I said, who is Donald? Yeah, he created own collection framework. And I answered no.
Why would anybody do that?
I don't like to meet Donald, who created own collection framework, because back then I was in huge projects, and everyone tried to inherit from list or whatever, and whatever I saw was really bad. And I say, okay, this guy is probably crazy. He created his own collection framework. And they say, yeah, it is going to be open source in Eclipse. And I say, in Eclipse? I go, no, I'm absolutely not interested in another collection framework. But with your background right now, I'm really curious because I already heard good things what Eclipse Collection Framework can actually do and the ideas. And I have the suspicion we will need more than 1 hour just to cover maybe, I think blocks is already, I didn't want it to ask too much about blocks because night is short, So I think the next time we should gentle start with blocks and maybe start with the collection, the collection framework. But what interests me, so you started just to code at Goldman Sachs and then you missed something, right? And what was the, and your job was just to implement calculations or what?
I worked on back-end, systems for calculating, let's say, P&L or doing regulatory reporting and stuff. So I went through I worked at Goldman for 15 and a half years and went through, many years of just, once again, I was an internal developer at a bank. I didn't get involved in open source until
No, but as an internal developer, there was a complex code with calculations or bank stuff, not like CRUD, what I usually do, database.
Well, no, it's funny because we had large database problems. We had large memory space problems. Actually, Eclipse Collections was born in a space where I was dealing with large Java caches, where we built our own custom, caching framework, and we were dealing with immense size memory spaces at the time. Where, and you can read about this in various places of blogs on my site where I talk about the constraints, and also I talk about this in the book because in the early days.
You mentioned a book. What book is it?
So it's called Eclipse Collections Categorically, and the subtitle's Level Up Your Programming Game. It's the story of basically the development, and then ultimately it's a comprehensive coverage of the Eclipse Collections API, which is a very rich collections framework, and it covers.
And you can order it right now. Is this?
Yeah, it's up on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's available on Kindle if you use that, or if you don't use the Kindle device, there's the Kindle app. It's in the Kindle Unlimited program right now. So if anybody has Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Free as in you're paying for Kindle Unlimited if you have it.
How many pages?
In print, so let's see. I guess the hardcover book is, I think, 377.
Okay.
I think the paperback one is 430 maybe.
And you're also describing the concepts, what like in the podcast, right? So the interesting ideas.
Yeah. So really, if you want to see what a collections framework would look like in Java, if Java had lambdas at the beginning, this is my view of what a collections framework
super interesting.
Look like.
I will buy the book actually after the show. So
well, thank you.
Yeah, really interesting, and I think, and now I got actually why you implemented collections. If I knew that back then.
Yeah, and actually what I could tell you as well, you can read the preface for free on the online reading sample on Amazon, and actually I explain in the preface why I created Eclipse Collections and the problem it was solving.
This is the cliffhanger.
You'll see that in 4 pages as opposed to taking over an hour for me to get to that point. But 4 pages to explain. And it was really what would be very interesting maybe for a follow-up conversation. The key thing that got me developing collection containers themselves were I was solving memory problems in the 32-bit space that Java wasn't solving for me. I had to basically fit into, at the time, large caches that were pushing the boundaries of 32-bit space. We could get up to, with 32-bit Java on Solaris, we could get up to 4 gigs of memory, right? So a bit more than obviously could do in Windows at the time. But I had more stuff that I could fit in that space. And collections actually wound up being one of the key problems I had to solve.
Google had similar problems, what I remember.
Did they?
Then.
Okay. Well, it's funny. Yeah, it's like pre 64-bit when memory was voluminous, but I've always had this problem of dealing with memory as a constraint. But I also it's funny. My 2 primary challenges in Java were memory was something that was causing me nightmares in my day job. The other thing that was causing me just agita and pain in my day job was having to read for loops over and over and over again. It's I want a developer to tell me what they're doing, not how they're doing it. Right. So I got tired of so it was basically a combination of memory and code duplication. Those were the key
for
things.
Loops, you hated the for loops just because you knew Smalltalk.
Yeah, I had experience.
Because for me, for loops were not a problem. I remember as Java Streams came out, it was okay. Different for loop. I was not that impressed. Now I really like it, so I don't use for loops anymore. But
it's funny because once again, I don't have a problem with writing for loops. I've written plenty of them. In fact, you have to write them if you implement a collections framework. It was really, once again, just having to read them over and over again. It's I'm reading through all this code to see an if statement in the middle of a for loop to see if they're adding to a collection. It's you're doing a filter. Or, you're returning out of the if statement. You're doing an any satisfy.
It's an interesting point. So the Java collection framework is condensed patterns into methods, basically, right?
Yeah, and so the key thing you get with Eclipse Collections is, with Java Streams, you've got, let's say, this lazy approach to doing stuff. And we have lazy approaches in Eclipse Collections, plus we support streams as well because we integrate with the JDK types. But you have the actual rich methods like filter, map, and reduce it's a different name in Eclipse Collections. It's called select, collect, and inject. For folks familiar with Ruby, it'd be more Ruby-esque, or if you know Smalltalk, you'd know where they came from. But the methods on the collections themselves. So you don't have to do .stream and then terminal operation. They're eager on the method on the collections themselves, which is if you're familiar with for loops, it's the closest thing you're going to get to a for loop because it executes immediately. Behind it is a for loop, right? Typically, so.
Then I cannot read the 4 pages right now, but my suspicion is that you had a big data problem, and then you got the idea you need some kind of collection, and because you have to change things, you say, now do it right, and you wanted to add blocks from Smalltalk combined with for loop-less programming, so something like streams, and then how collections happened, and you combined the streaming with big data support and blocks, and this is almost like Java streams next, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because like you mentioned, like anonymous inner classes. For 10 years, I had to use anonymous inner classes to basically implement blocks, right? And I call it an eye gouging experience, right? You see something, it's like, why didn't you just write the for loop? It would be simpler. And it's like, well, I wanted the abstraction.
Yeah, I also hated
to say
the
what
inner classes. Yeah.
Well, and IDEs would actually fold out. IntelliJ would try and hide some of it for you, but it was still there. It's annoying.
Thank you. So next time we will cover blocks first, maybe Smalltalk, Clipper, and Java. So what's the difference? And what also surprises me that you like Ruby. I also wanted to learn Ruby. I like Ruby. I think, okay, it's interesting. And but never happened because Java was always still too popular. I have less interest somehow in Python. So if I would pick, Ruby or Python, I don't know why. I would go with Ruby. I no idea why. It's just.
Well, put a pin in. When I wrote my book, I used AsciiDoc and I used ASCII Dr. J, and I used ASCII Dr. J is implemented in JRuby. So even though I haven't done I have the Ruby book and did maybe I'm more familiar with the language than I have actually used it, right? And I'm familiar with like its lineage, and I got to meet the creator of the language back at Uppsala in 2002. His name is Yukihiro Matsumoto, or just Mats. But using JRuby, like literally over the last 3 years, has been amazing, and I've gotten to become friends with Charles Nutter as a result. So
and the ASCII Doctor is maintained by Mojave Linux. Is his handle on Twitter? I forgot. Is Dan?
Dan, yes.
And we spent a lot of time with Dan because he was also early on Java E. So on all Java ones, we have long talks about Java E, Tommy, and ecosystem. And he's a great guy.
Yeah, so fun stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to the next time we can talk. This was amazing. So thank you for the chat and the questions.
Thank you. And I will publish in a few weeks. And I'm really looking forward to whatever. So we can, even recap Envy. Was interesting conversation. I learned a lot. But interesting stuff, Well,
who you need to have on your show to talk about Envy is Mike Milinkovic, who's the director of the Eclipse Foundation.
Mike Milinkovic was already on the podcast.
Did you talk about Envy?
I don't think so. So, but I can, because we talk about Jakarta E back then, Mike Milinkovic.
Okay.
And we had Tanya. She was also working for OTI. So I had lots of OTI people here on the podcast. So small world. Yeah.
Yep. Good stuff.
Thank you a lot. And see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Take care.